I still remember the way the champagne glass felt in my hand. Cold, delicate, trembling slightly against my fingers, as if it already knew what I didn't. We were on the rooftop of that modern steel and glass restaurant Evan loved, overlooking the city where he had built his empire. The evening shimmered with warm candlelight and careful smiles, the table dressed in linen and lit by golden bulbs strung like tiny suns above us. It was supposed to be a celebration. His promotion to partner at the firm. 15 years of long hours, weekend absences, and emotional distance, all seemingly worth it for this. I stood up, heart fluttering like a page caught in the wind, and cleared my throat gently. "To Evan," I began, raising my glass. "The man who—" "I'm filing for divorce," he said. I blinked. I must have misheard. There was laughter, nervous, soft, but he didn't smile. He just sipped his wine and stared ahead, calm and distant, like a guest at someone else's disaster. The room fell into a hush. My arm lowered involuntarily. The toast I had written in my journal the night before, the one I practiced in the bathroom mirror, with love and gratitude and something that almost sounded like pride, evaporated into the air like smoke. "We've grown apart," he said casually, as if announcing a change in dinner reservations. "It's been a long time coming, but I thought this would be the right time to share with everyone present." The right time? Among colleagues, friends, strangers dressed in tailored suits and curated grins? I couldn't breathe. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. I felt the stares, hot and sharp, pressing into my skin like needles, waiting for my reaction. Waiting for me to smile and nod and pretend that this bomb dropped in the middle of my life was somehow civilized. My voice betrayed me. I said nothing. My lips parted, but no sound came. Just air. Just hurt. The dinner ended in a blur of polite handshakes and awkward goodbyes. No one looked me in the eyes. I walked beside Evan like a ghost, feeling the lipstick tighten on my drying lips, the heels pinching, the dress I wore suddenly feeling like a costume on a stranger. In the car, I stared at him. His profile was calm, distant. A man who had already moved on in his mind. "Why?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "You'll be fine," he said, not even glancing my way. "You always land on your feet." I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, but instead, I stared out the window and watched the city blur by, my reflection in the glass barely visible. When we got home, I went straight to the laundry room. I don't know what made me do it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that once made me count the seconds between his replies. That knew the way silence could grow teeth. I pulled his suit jacket from the dry cleaning bag, holding it to my face like a woman mourning a lover already gone. The scent hit me. Subtle, expensive, and unmistakably familiar. Chanel No. 5. I hadn't worn it in years. I switched to something lighter after he said it gave him headaches. So why was it on him now? My stomach twisted. I sat down on the cold tile floor, the jacket bunched in my lap, my breath shallow and uneven. The perfume was faint but persistent, like a ghost that refused to leave. I needed answers. I went to the study. Years ago, we shared everything. Emails, calendars, cloud backups. He never bothered to change the login to our old iCloud account. Maybe he thought I'd never look, but I did. It didn't take long. A synced photo album. New uploads. One, dated last weekend. Evan. In the cabin. The one we used to visit in the fall, when we still played pretend about being in love. He was smiling. Next to him was a woman. My heart stopped. Camille. I hadn't seen her in years. We lost touch after my wedding. She'd moved out of state, or so I thought. She was wearing a familiar scarf, one I had once let her borrow and never got back, and around her neck, a necklace. My grandmother's. I thought I'd lost it. There, in the soft golden light of the cabin, they looked like a painting, like a life I wasn't invited to. Something shattered inside me. This wasn't just divorce. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. This was a betrayal crafted slowly, with precision, with history. And suddenly, the silence of that dinner made sense. The ease of his announcement, the faint perfume, the calm detachment. He had already grieved me, and now it was my turn. It's strange how a life can vanish without a single explosion, how it can dissolve one quiet compromise at a time. When I first met Evan, I thought he was magnetic. That's the word I used with my sister Clara over late-night wine on her apartment balcony. He's magnetic, I'd said, eyes lit up, voice breathless, as if I were announcing a rare constellation I'd spotted in the sky. He was handsome in a crisp, buttoned-up way. Charcoal suits, clean shoes, a jawline that looked carved from marble. But it was the silence between his words that drew me in. The way he listened, tilted his head just slightly, as though he were reading a deeper language written beneath my sentences. That aloofness, that restraint, I mistook it for depth. We met in a gallery. I had just sold my first watercolor series and was riding the high of small success. He walked past my work without even stopping until he reached the bar, and when he did speak to me, it wasn't about my art. It was about the wine. You look like someone who would know whether this is a good Pinot. He was charming, if not entirely warm, but I liked the way he looked at me, like I was already part of his world. By the end of the year, I had moved into his apartment. By the next, I had packed away my canvases. It's just for now, I told myself, folding up my paint-stained aprons, wrapping my brushes in a silk scarf. He had started law school, and I was helping with the bills by taking freelance admin work. We were building something together, I thought. A future. A foundation. But time has a way of hardening good intentions into regret. I became his assistant, more than his partner, managing appointments, RSVPs, buying gifts for his colleagues' children, planning birthday dinners, scanning receipts. When his mother visited, I made sure her favorite scones were in the pantry and fresh flowers were on the nightstand. When Evan passed his bar exam, I made him a shadow box filled with notes from his study sessions and framed photos from our early dates. He said, "That's cute." Not thank you, just cute. It started to hurt in invisible ways, small ways. He began correcting me at dinners, laughing when I used big words or spoke too confidently about art. "You're so creative," he'd say with a smirk, "but you leave the real world to me, okay?" I laughed at first. I always laughed. It became my shield. I remember the day I stopped painting. Not officially, not in any grand gesture, but gradually. The easel stayed folded in the closet. The corner of our bedroom where I used to create became a dumping ground for dry cleaning bags and briefcases. My fingers grew unfamiliar with the texture of paper. My creativity atrophied like an unused limb. Once, I brought it up during a weekend drive. "I've been thinking about doing a local show again. Maybe just some small pieces." He didn't even look at me. Just adjusted the radio and said, "You don't need to prove anything. We're not starving artists in Brooklyn. Be realistic." Lid. It wasn't cruel. It was dismissive. That's the thing with men like Evan. They don't throw punches. They place stones in your coat pockets one by one until you forget how to float. My friends saw it, Clara especially. She once confronted me in the bathroom at Thanksgiving. "Do you even know who you are outside of him?" I laughed. Of course I laughed, because crying would have opened a flood I wasn't ready for. Over time, Our marriage became a beautifully decorated cage. On the outside, everything gleamed. Trips to Aspen, charity galas, a pristine home with marble countertops and muted tones. But inside, I felt like a fading photograph. No sharpness left, no color. I stopped arguing. It wasn't worth it. His indifference was more punishing than anger. You can scream into a storm and at least feel the wind push back. But Evan, he gave me nothing to push against. We stopped holding hands. I can't remember when that changed. Maybe after the Mexico trip, when he took 2 client calls during dinner, and I spent the evening sipping margaritas alone under the stars. The house, the one we bought just before his big promotion, became my world. I curated it for him. Every pillow, every scent, every piece of art, chosen to match his taste. Not mine. I started wearing neutral colors because he once said bright prints were a bit much. I grew out my bangs because he said they made me look young and unserious. I started to fade in photographs. Looking back, it's obvious now. The erasure wasn't sudden. It was quiet, surgical. And I allowed it because I thought love was sacrifice. I thought devotion meant disappearing into someone else's outline and calling it harmony. But that night, after the divorce announcement, sitting on the cold bathroom floor with his suit jacket still in my lap, I realized I had built a house around a man who never planned to stay, a house where I wasn't even allowed to decorate the walls with my own colors, and somewhere in that house, I had buried myself. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember the cold glow of the laptop on my skin and the silence of the house. So heavy, it felt like it had weight. I was curled on the couch, still wearing the dress from the rooftop dinner, my bare feet tucked beneath me, Evan's suit jacket lying abandoned on the floor like a snake's shed skin. The iCloud password came to me in a whisper. I hadn't used it in years, but muscle memory is strange that way. Our old shared account, set up when we first got married, when we still believed everything should be shared. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Closure, evidence, maybe just a reason to scream. The messages hit me like glass to the facepan. There were months of them. Long, winding conversations between Evan and Camille. My Camille. The woman who once held my hand through my father's funeral. Who curled beside me in college dorm beds, whispering about dreams and heartbreak and art. She had once painted beside me. She had once cried over a boy who didn't love her back. Now she was the one who took mine. The messages weren't just sexual. They were worse. They were intimate, deep, personal. Camille wrote things like, "She never really saw you, not like I do. You were always too big for that marriage. You deserve to be free." They spoke about me like I was a ghost. An inconvenient memory, an outdated frame around a better picture. One photo made my stomach twist. Camille in his shirt, sitting on our bed. My bed. My sheets. Her smile smug, casual. Around her neck was a delicate gold chain with a teardrop opal. A necklace my grandmother gave me before she died. One I had lost 3 years ago and cried for like a child. Evan told me I'd misplaced it. He had given it to her. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled into the bathroom and threw up until my stomach was empty and raw. Then I sat on the tile, shaking, clutching the toilet paper holder like it could anchor me. When I confronted him, it wasn't cinematic. No plates thrown, no screaming match. Just a hollow kitchen, morning light filtering through the blinds, and the scent of burnt toast I forgot I was making. "I saw the messages," I said. He didn't even flinch, just took a slow sip of coffee and glanced at his phone like I was interrupting his day. "I know about you and Camille," I said again, louder. His shoulders dropped, a sigh, not of guilt, but of annoyance. "So you finally looked. That was it. Not denial, Not apology, just confirmation, handed over like it was overdue paperwork. Why? My voice cracked on the word. He shrugged. Because we're better suited. I stared. She was my best friend. He looked at me then, really looked, but not with remorse, with something colder. You made everything about you, Lydia. Your feelings, your dreams. I needed ease. I laughed. It was a broken, bitter thing. You mean someone who didn't challenge you, someone who let you shrink. His face hardened. Someone who doesn't make everything a performance. That hurt more than anything. Because if I had performed, it was for him. To be good, desirable, supportive, not too loud, not too ambitious. The perfect wife. He left that morning like it was any other. No fanfare. Just grabbed his keys, said he'd have the paperwork sent over. By noon, I discovered he'd moved half our money into separate accounts. Credit cards declined. My phone plan, canceled. My name removed from our investment portfolio. Legally, tactically, he had been planning this for months. Probably since the first time she touched my necklace and called it hers. I spiraled. The house became a tomb. I wandered it barefoot, dazed, touching furniture like it was unfamiliar. I stopped eating. The fridge was full, but nothing tasted like anything. Even water felt like swallowing glass. Friends texted awkward condolences. A few called once, then never again. Evan told people I'd been unstable, distant. That the marriage had been over for a while. And the worst part? Some believed him. I saw it in their silences. I screamed once. Loud, primal. It didn't help. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tracing old cracks with my eyes. Sometimes I would put on his shirts just to feel something. Sometimes I'd spray the perfume he hated, the one I used to wear in college, just to reclaim it. The scent clung to me like a ghost. A younger version of myself whispering, "Remember me?" One night, during a storm, I climbed into the attic. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for rope, or maybe I just wanted to be somewhere above the pain. I found a box. Old, dusty, labeled Lydia, Art School, my handwriting. The A still had the star inside the triangle, the way I used to sign everything. Inside were sketchbooks, some torn at the edges, others still smelling faintly of turpentine and lilac lotion. I flipped through page after page of people, of color, of life. There were portraits of Camille and Evan, one of my mother holding a mug, self-portraits, raw and unflinching. I could see my old self in them, confident, unashamed. Beneath it all, a sealed envelope. To me, from me, date, graduation. Day. My hands shook as I opened it. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were intact. If you're reading this, I hope you didn't lose her. The girl who believed beauty was worth chasing, the one who painted grief into color, who knew that love should never make you small. I hope you never traded her for comfort or silence. But if you did, it's not too late. She's still in there. Somewhere. I cried until my shirt was soaked. Then, I lit a candle, brought down my easel, and began to paint. The sea called to me like an old friend I'd forgotten how to love. That morning, I packed a single suitcase, clothes, a sketchbook, my old paints, and the necklace Camille stole, and I'd taken back when I finally faced her. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just a note to my lawyer saying, "Send everything to the address on file. I won't be home." The drive to my Aunt Lillian's cottage took 4 hours, but it felt like crossing into another life. The coastal town was sleepy, all wind-chapped wood and sun-faded signs. Her cottage stood at the edge of a bluff, half swallowed by ivy and sea fog. I hadn't been there since I was a teenager. Back then, Lillian taught me that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was space. Space to feel, to see, to become. Inside, the air smelled of salt and thyme. Dust floated in sunbeams like snowflakes. The floors creaked like they remembered me. I opened every drawer and cabinet like I was exorcising ghosts. By sunset, I had thrown out every mirror. I couldn't stand the sight of myself. Not yet. Not when every glance felt like looking at a woman I no longer knew. The days were long and wordless. I walked the shoreline barefoot, let the sea numb my skin, picked up smooth stones and dead shells, and once, a bird's feather tangled in seaweed. At first I didn't paint. I couldn't. My hands trembled. My chest ached like it still housed something rotten. But the silence made space for grief. I would sit on the porch, blanket wrapped around me, watching gulls sweep over the cliffs. Sometimes I wept. Sometimes I didn't. It felt like the world was detoxing me, bleeding Evan out of my bones inch by inch. Then one night, I dreamt of the necklace, not as it was on Camille, but as it was on my grandmother, her frail fingers resting on mine, saying, "This is for the parts of you you haven't met yet." I woke up with the urge to paint. The first strokes were chaotic. Rage, red and black, and thick globs of pain. Then came shapes. Then came her, the woman in the painting. At first, she was just a blur. A figure walking into the ocean, hair tangled by wind, dress clinging to her knees. But I knew who she was. She was me, not drowning, but surrendering the version of herself that stayed for too long. The next day, I found a tiny bookstore tucked between a fish market and a crumbling antiques shop. It smelled of old pages and lemon balm. The woman behind the counter had gray curls and eyes like quiet skies. Her name was Elise. She didn't ask why I was in town. She just handed me a cup of peppermint tea and said, "You have that look, like you're unpeeling." I blinked. She smiled. We all come here for something. Usually ourselves. I started shelving books for her on weekends. It felt good to touch stories not my own, to alphabetize lives that weren't broken. She paid me in cash and lent me novels I never finished but pretended I had. We rarely talked. When we did, it was about the weather or poetry or the right type of sea salt for baking bread. One day, I told her I used to be an artist. She said, "No one used to be. They just forget for a while." At night, I journaled. I didn't write about Evan at first. I wrote about me, about Lydia before him, about how I stopped wearing perfume because he said it gave him headaches, about how I painted once in the middle of the night and cried over a portrait that felt too honest, about how I stopped laughing too loudly because he flinched when I wrote about the time he threw out a dress I loved because it was too attention-seeking. I had smiled then, said, "You're right." I wrote about the silence between us, how it started like fog and became cement. Eventually, the letters started to arrive, neatly typed, no salutation. "I believe we can resolve the property division amicably. Please respond to the proposed financial settlement. Your cooperation is appreciated." I burned the first one in the fireplace. The others I stacked in a drawer, unopened. I was no longer the woman who trembled in rooftop restaurants. One morning, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still the color of bruises, and the sea roared like it had secrets. I wrapped a shawl around me, carried a thermos of coffee to the cliff, and watched the sun stretch its fingers across the horizon. In that moment, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for understanding, not even for justice. I was becoming the woman in the ocean, the one I painted. She hadn't walked into the water to disappear. She walked into it to be reborn. I wasn't healed, but I was healing, and that was enough for now. The first time I showed someone my art again, I thought I might vomit. It was Elise, of course. I'd brought 3 small canvases to the bookstore, tucked in brown paper like secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to share. She peeled the wrapping slowly, reverently. Her eyes lingered on the first piece. A faceless bride standing in a forest of shadowy figures, veil fluttering in a wind that wasn't there. She didn't speak right away. Then she looked up at me and said simply, "You need to show these." I laughed. It came out dry and disbelieving. "To who?" "There's a co-op gallery in town," she said. "Women run. They'd understand." The gallery was tucked behind a bakery that always smelled of cardamom and butter. Its walls were uneven, painted white over brick, the lighting soft like moonlight. The curator, a silver-haired woman named Nora, with thick turquoise rings and laugh lines as deep as riverbeds, looked through my portfolio without asking many questions. When she saw the piece titled "The Hand Through Glass," a ghost-like palm pressed against a window, smudged and reaching, she said, "Yes, this one hurts. That's good." She gave me a wall. I called the series Erased. Each canvas bled with memory. A woman burning letters in a porcelain sink, a child hiding behind curtains while thunder cracked outside, a lipstick-stained wine glass with a crack running through it. I used muted tones, sepias, dusky blues, ash gray, and buried symbols, beneath layers. A ring painted over with gold leaf, a necklace buried in shadow. I didn't include my name. Just L, but people came. They stood in front of my pain and felt something. A few cried. Some left sticky notes of encouragement on the wall. "This is my story too," one said. "Thank you for painting what I couldn't say." For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was seen. One afternoon, Nora asked me if I'd like to sell prints. She wanted to feature me in the spring showcase. The idea frightened me, but I said yes. And then I called a lawyer. Elise's. Cousin Marin was the kind of woman who wore boots in all seasons and had a mind like a scalpel. When I showed her the letters Evan had sent, the bank statements I'd managed to print before he locked me out, and the screenshots I'd taken from the shared iCloud before he realized I still had access, her mouth tightened. "He's counting on you staying broken," she said. "Let's disappoint him." With Marin's help, I traced Evan's quiet manipulations. Accounts opened in his name only, large transfers disguised as business expenses, asset shifts to a shell company registered, to Camille's brother. And then there was Camille. I hadn't thought I'd want to see her again, but part of me needed closure, even if it was silent and from a distance. So I tracked her down. She lived in a high-rise in the city now, not far from where Evan and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. She still had that gleaming hair, the laugh, like ice cubes clinking in a glass. But she didn't look happy. I saw her arguing on the phone outside a boutique. Her voice was shrill, frantic. She waved her arms. At one point, she pulled something from her bag, a letter, and tore it up right there on the sidewalk. Later, Marin uncovered something interesting. Camille wasn't just Evan's mistress. She was his mistake. Turns out, she'd learned about his offshore transfers, and she was blackmailing him. Quietly, elegantly, but not for love. She wanted her cut. That's when I knew. Their affair hadn't been about passion. It was about power, about hunger, and now they were eating each other alive good. Back at the cottage, I was painting a new series, Becoming. Softer colors, bolder brush strokes. The faceless woman now had a mouth, slightly parted, eyes wide open. One rainy morning while cleaning the upstairs bathroom, I found a small bottle tucked behind a loose tile. A tiny vial of perfume, my old scent. The one Evan said gave him headaches. the one I stopped wearing the day he rolled his eyes and muttered, "You always overdo it." I didn't remember leaving it here. Maybe I brought it long ago, for a summer visit. Or maybe Aunt Lillian wore it too. Once. Either way, it was mine. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened it. The scent hit me like a memory. Jasmine. Bergamot. Something musky underneath. It smelled like the girl I used to be. And then I walked downstairs, uncorked the drain, and poured it all out. I watched it swirl away like poison. The past wasn't welcome here. In the following weeks, I began to orchestrate, not react. Marin filed motions. She served discovery papers that would make Evan squirm. I sent no replies to his lawyers, only formal counters with well-documented evidence of fraud, emotional abuse, and financial coercion. He tried to call. I let it go to voicemail. In one message, he sounded nervous. "We don't need to drag this out. Think of your reputation." In another, he was bitter. "You were nothing without me. I saved them both." Evidence. Then, one evening, just as the sun was setting over the cliffs, Elise brought over a bottle of wine in a thick envelope. "From Marin," she said. Inside were finalized drafts for the legal motion, a complete portfolio of our case, photos, bank records, texts, and at the top, a printout of Camille's emails to Evan. She had sold him out. "She's flipping," Elise said. "Marin thinks she might testify if it benefits her." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Later, I sat in the studio and painted one last piece for Becoming. A woman standing at a shoreline, facing away from the viewer. Her hair loose, her hands open. In one palm, a broken necklace. In the other, a paintbrush. The caption read, "She built herself again, not from scratch, but from truth." I had no mirrors in that house, but I finally knew what I looked like. The morning of the hearing, I chose a crimson blouse. Not red like anger. Red like rebirth. Like blood returning to frozen limbs. It had been folded in my closet for months, a gift from Elise on the day we celebrated the sale of my first painting. "You need color again," she'd said, pressing the silky fabric into my hands. "No more hiding." I wore it with high-waisted black slacks and my aunt's silver earrings. I curled my hair. I dabbed on a hint of my new perfume, orange blossom and cedar, nothing like the ghost of the jasmine I once wore for him. I stood in the mirrorless bathroom of the cottage and looked at myself. Not in reflection, but in feeling. I felt tall, whole, present. Marin met me outside the courthouse. Her stride was brisk, but her hand on my shoulder was steady. "You ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Evan was already seated when we walked into the hearing room. He wore his usual navy suit, a smirk pulling at the edge of his mouth like he still thought this was a game he could win. He looked at me once, briefly, and something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or the unfamiliar discomfort of no longer being the strongest presence in the room. Then Camille entered. She didn't sit beside him. She sat with us. The bailiff called for order, and for a moment, time suspended. I could hear my breath, slow and steady. I remembered the first time I stepped into a gallery and saw strangers looking at my grief hung on the wall. This moment wasn't so different. It was just another exhibition. But this time, I was the artist and the subject. And Evan? He was the fading brushstroke. Camille testified first. She didn't look at me. I didn't need her to. She held a folder in her lap, fingers trembling just slightly. When the judge asked if she had evidence, she stood and handed it over without drama. Emails, financial statements, texts, She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply told the truth about how Evan had promised her the world, then mocked her behind her back. How he called her a stopgap in messages to colleagues. How he said I was emotionally unstable and she was emotionally desperate. How he transferred money to an offshore account, then gaslit both of us when we noticed missing funds. How he whispered different lies in each of our ears. "I thought he loved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He loved control. The room shifted. I felt it physically, the weight of illusion collapsing. Evan's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand with my spine straight, my palms open. I didn't carry a folder. I didn't need one. "My name is Lydia Whitaker," I began, and my voice didn't shake. "And I am here to reclaim what was taken from me, not just in marriage, but in silence." I told the truth, not the soap opera version Evan probably expected. I didn't scream. I didn't throw accusations. I told the quiet parts, the way he'd comment on my weight after dinner, the time he threw my paintings in the attic because they cluttered the energy, the way I walked on eggshells for years, not realizing they were of my own dreams, crushed beneath his shoes. I told them about the money, the lies, the isolation, how he froze our accounts without warning, how he tried to disappear me with legalese and erasure. And then I told them about finding myself again, about the cottage with no mirrors, about painting until my fingers ached and my soul remembered its shape, about learning that survival is not the same as living. I ended simply. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to speak. That's all I was ever denied. My own voice." Evan didn't speak much. When the judge questioned him on the offshore accounts, his answers were clipped, defensive. When pressed on Camille's testimony, he denied nothing. He didn't apologize. He didn't plead. But I watched his posture shrink inch by inch. I watched the confidence slide off his face like melting wax. The hearing ended with a ruling in my favor, a substantial settlement, restitution, a public record of the emotional and financial abuse. But the real victory, that was quieter. That was watching Evan walk out of that room not as a powerful man, but as a revealed one, naked in his smallness, undone not by scandal, but by truth. A month later, the gallery held a solo exhibition in my name. I titled it Resurrection. People came from all over. Locals, tourists, even a woman who'd followed my anonymous work since the Erased series and cried in front of my painting titled Inheritance, a golden ring submerged in water. At the center of the exhibit stood a single canvas on its own wall. It showed the same faceless woman from Erased, once walking into the ocean. But now, she was walking out. Her face was turned to the sky, hair dripping, hands open to the wind. The caption read, "She was not what he buried. She was what survived." I stood across the room and watched people stare at her. Some lingered, some cried. One woman touched her chest and whispered, "That's me." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just my story. It was every woman who'd been silenced, bent, erased. And it was the beginning, not the end. That night, after the gallery closed, Elise and I drank wine in the garden behind her bookstore. The moon was high, and somewhere nearby, ocean waves broke softly against the rocks. "I've never seen you like this," she said. "Like what?" "Whole." I smiled. It wasn't triumphant, it was peaceful, because I had stopped waiting for him to come back, for closure, for justice to taste sweet. It didn't. It tasted like salt and paint and wind. It tasted like me.